Dominic Sabello was the most powerful crime boss in Boston, the kind of man whose name made judges stammer and made grown men forget how to hold eye contact. He built an empire on blood and silence and loyalty that didn't ask questions. And he was about to watch all of it burn. Not because someone betrayed him, not because the feds finally got close, because of a woman. A woman he was never supposed to love. A woman he was told was disposable. And the moment he found out the truth about who she really was, he didn't reach for a gun. He didn't make a call. He put his fist through a wall. Then he made a decision that would cost him everything. 3 months later, rain hit the penthouse windows like 1,000 small confessions, and Sera Valenti stood with her back pressed against the bedroom wall, wearing his shirt and nothing else, holding a manila folder against her chest, the way a woman holds the last thing keeping her alive. She had been crying. She wasn't crying now. Whatever she had found inside that folder had burned the tears right out of her. What was left was something harder, something that didn't blink. Dominic. Her voice was steady, dangerously steady, the voice of a woman standing on the edge of something she cannot walk back from. How long have you known what I am? He sat on the edge of the bed, shirt untucked, sleeves rolled to the forearms, and his knuckles. His knuckles were split open and bleeding, not from a fight, from a wall, from what he did the moment he read what was in that folder, before she found it. His phone lay shattered on the hardwood floor between them, like a dead thing. He looked at her. Not the way a boss looks at a liability, not the way a husband looks at a woman who has just become dangerous to him. He looked at her the way a man looks at the one thing in his life he is not willing to lose. And what Sera saw in that look terrified her more than anything in the folder, because it was not anger. It was not betrayal. It was a man who had already decided, a man who would watch his empire come apart at the joints, contract by contract, alliance by alliance, body by body, and he would not move. He would not flinch. He would stand in the wreckage with her hand in his and call it a fair trade. That is what she saw, and that is what frightened her, because no one had ever looked at her like that, and she did not know what to do with a man who would choose her over everything. Dominic Sabello did not inherit an empire. He inherited a mess. And he spent 12 years turning it into the quietest, most profitable criminal organization on the eastern seaboard. His father had ruled through volume, through spectacle, through the kind of violence that makes headlines and invites federal attention. Dominic watched, learned, and did the opposite. He fired the loud men. He promoted the patient ones. He replaced brutality with precision and spectacle with silence. And within a decade, the Sabello family controlled the Boston waterfront, the construction unions, and a network of legitimate businesses so clean that the IRS had audited them twice and apologized both times. Dominic did not shout. He did not threaten. He read people the way chess players read boards, 4 moves ahead, always. And by the time his opponents realized they were losing, the game was already over. But there was one problem he could not outthink. Victor Valenti. The Valenti family was old blood, old money, old grudges. They had been circling the same territory as the Sabellos for 2 generations. The ports, the waterfront contracts, the construction bids that kept both families fed. And for 2 generations, the balance had held. Barely. A turf war had been building for months, shipments intercepted, associates leaned on, two Sabello men jumped outside a bar in Charlestown. The math was simple. If Dominic didn't act, bodies would start dropping by Christmas. So when Victor Valenti requested a sit-down at a private dining room in the North End, neutral ground, white tablecloths, the particular hush of a restaurant where both the wine and the conversations cost more than most people's rent, Dominic agreed. Victor sat across from him with the relaxed posture of a man who believed he was holding the better hand. He proposed a truce, not a handshake, not a treaty, a marriage. His sister, Sera, to Dominic, a blood bond that made war impossible. Dominic studied him. He didn't want a wife. He didn't need a Valenti in his home. Victor leaned back and waved his hand as if he were describing a car he was trying to offload. She's not much to look at. Quiet. Keeps to herself. She won't be in your way. His own sister, offered like defective merchandise with a discount and an apology. Dominic asked one question. Does she know? Victor's mouth twitched. She'll do what she's told. Dominic agreed. Lorenzo, his consigliere, had already laid out the math in the car on the way over. A war with the Valentis would cost 8 figures and a dozen men. In the marriage cost nothing. They shook hands. Dominic left. Outside, the November air hit like a slap. Lorenzo fell into step beside him, collar turned up, hands in his coat pockets. A man who sells his own sister that cheap, Lorenzo said quietly. What do you think he'll sell you for? Dominic said nothing. He got in the car, but he filed it away. Because Dominic Sabello filed everything away. Before the wedding, Dominic did what he always did. He pulled a file. He had Lorenzo run a full background on Sera Valenti. What came back was almost nothing. No social media, no criminal associations, no known relationships, no arrests, no connections, no footprint in the world her family controlled. What she had was a nursing license and a job at a community clinic in Dorchester. Not a Valenti-affiliated hospital. Not a connected facility. A free clinic that served people with no insurance, addicts, undocumented workers, the kind of people the Valenti family wouldn't spit on if they were burning. She had been there 6 years. Dominic read that line twice. A Valenti. Working nights in a clinic that barely kept its lights on. Patching up strangers for almost nothing, while her brother ate dinner in private rooms and wore watches that cost more than her annual salary. It didn't fit. And things that didn't fit were the things Dominic paid the most attention to. He arranged to meet her before the ceremony. A coffee shop in Southie, neutral ground. He arrived first, took the seat facing the door, and waited. When Sera Valenti walked in, he cataloged her the way he cataloged everyone. Threat assessment, leverage points, vulnerabilities. She was plus size, dark-haired, he wearing a coat that had seen 4 winters and no dry cleaner, no makeup, no jewelry. She was not what the wives in his world looked like. Not the polished, engineered women who orbited men like him with the precision of satellites paid to stay in range. She moved through the coffee shop the way certain people move through the world, along the edges, shoulders slightly drawn, minimizing her footprint, as if she had learned very early that taking up space was something she needed to apologize for. But then she sat down across from him, and she looked at him, and her eyes were not what he expected. Sharp, steady, assessing. She was reading him the way he was reading her. No fear, no fluttering, no performance. You don't want this any more than I do, she said. So let's skip the part where you pretend. Nobody talked to Dominic Sabello like that. He recalibrated. She was not what Victor had advertised. She laid out her terms. Separate lives, separate rooms. She keeps working at the clinic. She doesn't attend his business functions. When the arrangement has served its purpose, she walks away clean. She delivered it like a woman negotiating from a position she knew was weak, but absolutely refused to act like it. Dominic agreed. She stood to leave, and as she reached for her coat, her sleeve pulled back, and he saw it. A bruise along her wrist, faded yellow at the edges, dark at the center. The kind of bruise that comes from a grip, not an accident. She caught him looking. She pulled her sleeve down, smoothly, practiced. The motion of someone who had done it before. Neither of them said a word, but something shifted behind Dominic's eyes. A question he did not come here to ask had lodged itself in his chest and was not leaving. Who did that to her? And why did he care? The ceremony was held at a courthouse downtown on a Thursday morning that felt like it had forgotten to become a day. Gray sky, gray stone, the kind of light that makes everything look like a photograph someone took by accident. Dominic's side, Lorenzo, two of his captains, and a silence that passed for respect. Sera's side, no one. Not Victor, not her mother, not a single Valenti. She arrived alone, walked through the courthouse doors carrying a small bag and wearing a simple ivory dress. Not a gown, not designer, something she had clearly bought herself from a place that didn't ask what the occasion was. She looked composed, controlled. The posture of a woman who had decided before she left her apartment that no one in this room would see her shake. But Dominic had spent his entire adult life reading the micro-expressions of men trying to lie to him across tables where the wrong word ended partnerships and occasionally ended more. And he saw it, the slight tremor in her hands, the way her fingers pressed into the fabric of her dress at her sides as if she were physically holding herself together. She was terrified. She just refused to show it. The vows were standard, legal, clinical, words designed by the state to make a transaction feel like a covenant. Sera said, "I do," in a voice that did not waver. Dominic said, "I do," the way he said everything, measured, deliberate, final. Then the officiant said, "You may kiss the bride." The room tightened. Lorenzo shifted his weight. One of the captains looked at the floor. Sera's jaw clenched, almost imperceptible. The smallest movement. But Dominic saw it. She was bracing, preparing herself the way you prepare for a thing you cannot stop and have decided to simply survive. He leaned in. He did not kiss her mouth. He pressed his lips to her temple, slowly, deliberately. The way you handle something you have been told is worthless, but suspect is priceless. It lasted 2 seconds, maybe 3. Sera's eyes closed, not in romance, in relief. The specific bone-deep relief of a woman who had walked into this building expecting to be claimed and was instead, for reasons she did not yet understand, acknowledged. They signed the papers. He drove her to the penthouse himself. She sat in the passenger seat watching the city slide past the window. Neither of them spoke until she said quietly, "Thank you for not making it worse than it had to be." The line hit Dominic somewhere beneath his ribs, not because of what she said, because of what it revealed. She had come into that courthouse preloaded for cruelty. From him, from another powerful man in a long line of powerful men who had handled her without caring how it felt. He showed her to her room. She set down her single bag. She looked around at the space, the wide bed, the harbor view, the closet that could hold 10 times what she owned. "It's bigger than my entire apartment," she said. He nodded. She paused in the doorway. "Dominic, whatever this is, I won't be a problem for you. I know how to disappear in a house." She said it like a skill, like a survival strategy perfected over decades of practice. Dominic walked back to his study. He sat in the dark for a long time, thinking about a woman who had just promised to make herself invisible, and how badly he wanted to make sure she never had to. They lived like ghosts in neighboring rooms. Dominic left before dawn, came home after midnight. Sera worked night shifts at the clinic, slept during the day, moved through the penthouse in the hours he wasn't there. They were ships passing through the same water, without ever touching the same wave. But the traces accumulated. He came home at 1 in the morning and found a plate of food in the fridge, covered in foil, with a small note in handwriting he was learning to recognize. "Leftovers. Microwave 2 minutes." Not romantic, not performative, when the gesture of someone who understood what it felt like to come home to an empty kitchen and had decided, without being asked, that he shouldn't have to. She woke up at 3 in the afternoon and found the coffee maker preloaded, timer set for 3 p.m. She stood in the kitchen staring at it for a long time. He had noticed her schedule. He had adjusted for it, and he had said nothing about it. The quiet competence of a man who paid attention to everything and advertised none of it. Dominic began cataloging things about her, not strategically, not the way he cataloged enemies and assets, something else, something involuntary. She read medical journals at the kitchen island with her glasses sliding down her nose. She hummed when she cooked, always slightly off-key, always the same song he couldn't place. She kept a small succulent on her windowsill and talked to it when she thought she was alone. She folded his laundry when she found it in the dryer, even though he had never asked. She did it with the practiced efficiency of a woman who had spent her entire life taking care of other people's things because no one had ever taken care of hers. The first real conversation happened on a Saturday morning, both of them home at the same time by accident. She was making eggs. He was reading the paper. She asked him what he was reading. He told her, a city council rezoning vote, dry municipal procedure. She had an opinion, a sharp, specific, surprisingly informed opinion about how the rezoning would affect development contracts along the waterfront. His waterfront. He stared at her. She shrugged. "I read the news. Nurses have downtime between patients." After that, he started asking her things, not personal things, strategic things, what she observed at the clinic, what she heard. She worked in the part of Boston his organization controlled, but never actually saw. The street level, the ground floor, the places where his decisions landed on real people. She had intelligence he had never had access to, and she delivered it plainly, without agenda, without trying to impress him. Then came the Tuesday night that changed the temperature. Dominic came home past midnight with a cut above his eyebrow, a negotiation that had gone sideways. He was pressing a bar napkin against it, the blood already soaking through. Sera was at the kitchen island reading. She looked up. Her eyes went to the cut, then to his hands, then back to the cut. She did not ask what happened. She stood. She opened a cabinet and pulled out a first aid kit she had apparently stocked the day she moved in. She sat him down on a stool and she stitched the cut with steady hands and absolute silence. Her fingers were warm against his face. She worked with the calm, focused precision of a woman who had closed worse wounds on worse nights in a clinic that smelled like antiseptic and exhaustion. When she finished, she said, "You should ice it." Then she went back to her room. Dominic sat in the kitchen for a long time. He touched the stitches, clean, tight, professional, and he tried to remember the last time someone had taken care of a wound for him. Any wound, any kind. He couldn't. Sera was at the clinic. Dominic was home, reviewing contracts at the kitchen island, when the lobby concierge called up. "A Mr. Valenti for you, sir." Dominic's jaw tightened. He buzzed him up. Victor walked into the penthouse the way he walked into everything, as if he already owned it and was deciding whether to keep it. He looked around with the slow, appraising gaze of a man calculating resale value. He touched the back of the couch. He glanced at the harbor view. He smiled the way men smile when they believe they are winning. "Nice place," Victor said. "She settling in?" "She's fine." "Good, good." Victor sat down without being invited. He adjusted his cuffs. Then the questions started. Not caring questions, surveillance questions. Has she said anything about the family? Has she mentioned any names? Has she talked about what she knows? Dominic answered each question with the same flat, unreadable tone he used in every negotiation where the other party thought they were being clever. He gave Victor nothing, but internally, something crystallized. A question that had been floating now had weight and edges. What does Sera know that her brother is afraid of? After Victor left, Dominic picked up his phone and called Lorenzo. "I need a full financial audit on the Valenti organization, not the surface, the foundation, every shell company, every holding, every account they've touched in the last 10 years. Lorenzo paused. "That's a significant undertaking." "Then start now." What came back over the following days was worse than Dominic expected. The Valenti organization was hemorrhaging money. Victor had been covering losses with increasingly reckless moves, over-leveraged deals, borrowed territory, due debts to people who charged interest in ways that didn't involve percentages. The family was rotting from the inside. The marriage proposal hadn't been a peace offering. It was a distraction. Victor needed Dominic looking at Sera instead of looking at Victor's books. But there was a second layer, and this one made Dominic go still. Sera's clinic. The free clinic in Dorchester where she had worked for 6 years. It was technically owned by a shell company. That shell company traced back, through 3 layers of incorporation, to the Valenti family. Sera didn't know. She thought she worked for a non-profit, but the clinic was being used to wash money. And if it ever drew federal attention, the person holding the liability wouldn't be Victor. It would be Sera. Dominic stood at the window of his study and looked out at the city and understood the full architecture of what Victor Valenti had built. He hadn't given his sister away to make peace. He had positioned her as a fall guy, a shield made of a woman he considered disposable. And because she was now a Sabello by marriage, when the weight came down, it would crush Dominic's family, not Victor's. He had 2 choices: tell Sera what her brother had done, or handle it in silence and keep her in the dark. One option protected the marriage, the other protected her. And for the first time in his career, Dominic realized those might not be the same thing. His phone buzzed. A text from Sera. "Running late. Left soup on the stove. Don't let it burn." He stared at the message for a long time. She noticed. Of course she noticed. She was a nurse, and she read bodies for a living. Blood pressure in the way someone sat. Pain levels in the way someone breathed. Lies in the way someone held their hands. She knew when a patient was hiding something before they opened their mouth. and she knew Dominic Sabello had been watching her differently for the past week. Thursday night. Both home. Sera was at the kitchen island with a textbook and a mug of tea. Dominic was across from her pretending to read a contract he had already read twice. She set her mug down. "You've been looking at me differently," she said. "Either tell me why or stop." Dominic studied her. He had spent 3 days weighing this decision. Telling her meant giving up the strategic advantage of information she didn't know he had. Keeping it meant protecting the arrangement, protecting the distance, even protecting the version of this marriage where she was a formality and he was in control. He told her everything: the financials, the shell company, the clinic, the money being washed through the place she had given 6 years of her life to. The fact that her brother had positioned her to absorb the consequences of his fraud. He laid it out the way he laid out everything, precisely, completely, without softening the edges. Sera didn't cry. She didn't scream. She went very still. The kind of still that isn't calm. The kind of still that happens when something inside a person confirms what they have always suspected, but never had the proof to name. "That sounds like Victor," she said quietly. Then the rest came. She was Victor's half-sister. Same father, different mother. Her mother had been a woman their father kept for 3 years in an apartment in Brookline. An affair that produced a daughter and a scandal. When the affair ended, Sera was absorbed into the Valenti household, like a debt someone was forced to honor. Victor's mother made sure Sera understood every single day that she was the evidence of her husband's betrayal. Not a daughter, a reminder. Victor tolerated her when she was useful, discarded her when she wasn't. The bruise on her wrist the day they met at the coffee shop, that was Victor. A grip bruise from the afternoon he told her she was marrying Dominic Sabello. Not asking, telling. The way you tell a piece of furniture where it's being moved. She became a nurse because it was the one thing no one in that family could take credit for. The clinic was her sanctuary. In the single place in her life she had built something real, something that was hers. And now she was learning it was never hers either. She looked at Dominic. Her eyes were dry and steady and furious. "Why did you tell me? You could have used this, played it against Victor. I would never have known." Dominic held her gaze. "Because you're not a piece on someone else's board. Not anymore." The silence that followed had a different texture than any silence they had shared before. It was not comfortable. It was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people standing on the same side of something for the first time. Then Sera said, "There's something else. Something Victor doesn't know I have." Dominic went still. "I kept records," she said. "Every transaction that came through the clinic that didn't look right. See, deposits that didn't match services. Payments from companies I'd never heard of. Names that repeated in patterns that made no sense for a free clinic." She paused. 6 years of records. I didn't know what they meant then. I do now. Dominic looked at her. The woman Victor Valenti had called quiet. The woman he'd dismissed as not much to look at. The woman he had thrown away like defective merchandise. She had just handed Dominic the weapon to dismantle the entire Valenti empire. And she had done it willingly, knowing exactly what it meant. The question was no longer whether Dominic would protect her. The question was whether he was ready for what she was about to make possible. The charity gala was held at the Four Seasons on a Friday night in December. Crystal chandeliers, a string quartet, 300 people moving through the ballroom with the rehearsed ease of a world that runs on money and the careful performance of belonging. Dominic brought Sera. She wore a deep burgundy dress, not flashy, not designer loud, fitted and intentional, something she had chosen herself. She looked like a woman who had decided quietly and permanently to stop apologizing for the space she occupied. The evening went well at first. Sera held her own the way she held everything, with warmth and intelligence and the kind of disarming honesty that made powerful people lean in because they couldn't figure out how to categorize her. She let them struggle. Then, Victor arrived. He crossed the ballroom with the loose, confident stride of a man who still believed his name meant something in this room. He approached Sera in front of a cluster of guests, a state senator, 2 developers, their wives, with the performative warmth of a brother putting on a show for an audience. "Look at you," Victor said, loud enough for the circle to hear. He gestured at her dress, her hair, the room around them. All cleaned up. Dominic must be a miracle worker. He laughed, the light, easy laugh of a man delivering cruelty as comedy. Honestly, no one would even know where she came from. The subtext landed exactly where it was aimed. She was charity, a reclamation project, trash he had generously donated to a worthy cause. A few people laughed, politely, uncomfortably. The senator's wife studied her champagne glass. Sera's face went neutral, the practiced blankness, in the mask she had been wearing since she was old enough to understand that her presence in the Valenti household was something she was supposed to feel guilty for. She started to deflect, to redirect, to do what she had always done. Dominic stepped forward, not in front of her, beside her. He placed his hand on the small of her back. The first time he had touched her in public, his fingers spread wide and steady against the fabric of her dress, and the gesture was so deliberate, so unmistakably intentional, that every person in the circle registered it. He looked at Victor. The expression on his face was the one that had ended business partnerships, collapsed negotiations, and, in certain rooms that existed outside the reach of polite society, ended things that could not be undone. He didn't raise his voice. He leaned slightly toward Victor and said something quiet, something specific, something that referenced account numbers and shell companies and a clinic in Dorchester, without naming any of them explicitly. A message encrypted for an audience of 1. The color drained from Victor's face, like water from a cracked glass. Then Dominic turned to the room, his hand still on Sera's back, his voice calm and conversational and absolute. "My wife is the most intelligent person in this building. Anyone who hasn't figured that out yet isn't paying attention." The silence that followed lasted exactly long enough to restructure every assumption in the room. Victor left. He did not say goodbye. In the car afterward, Sera was quiet for 6 blocks. The city moved past the windows in streaks of cold light. Her hands were in her lap. Her jaw was set. On the 7th block, she said, "You didn't have to do that." Dominic pulled the car to the curb. He put it in park. He turned to face her the way he faced things that mattered. Fully, completely, with nothing held in reserve. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear it." She waited. This stopped being an arrangement for me. His voice was low, steady, the voice of a man who had weighed every word before releasing it. I don't know when exactly. Maybe the stitches, maybe the soup on the stove, Maybe the first time you looked at me like I was a person instead of a title. But it stopped, and I'm not going to pretend it didn't. Sera's breath caught. A small sound. The smallest sound. The sound of a woman hearing something she had trained herself never to expect. She reached across the console and took his hand. She didn't say it back. Not yet. But she didn't let go either. And that was enough. For now. Victor moved fast. Faster than Dominic expected, which meant Victor had been preparing for this longer than anyone realized. 3 days after the gala, a Sabello-owned warehouse in Charlestown was hit. Not by police. By Valenti men. They came at 4 in the morning, broke through the loading dock, seized product worth 6 figures, and put 2 of Dominic's guys in the hospital. 1 with a shattered jaw, 1 with 3 broken ribs and a punctured lung. It was not a negotiation. It was a declaration. The same morning, someone filed an anonymous tip with the federal government about financial irregularities at a free clinic in Dorchester. By noon, 2 investigators were sitting in the clinic's back office, asking questions about funding sources, patient billing codes, and offshore accounts that Sera had never heard of, because she was never supposed to hear of them. That was the entire point. She was the name on the paperwork. She was the face in the building. She was the woman left holding the bag, while her brother set fire to it from a safe distance. Sera handled it. She was a nurse. She had spent years staying composed in rooms where people were dying. 2 federal investigators in cheap suits, asking leading questions, were not going to crack her. She gave them nothing. She answered what she could, referred them to the clinic's board for what she couldn't, and maintained the steady professional calm of a woman who understood that panic was a luxury she had never been able to afford. But when she came home that evening, her hands were shaking, not for herself, for her patients. "Those people have nowhere else to go," she said. She was pacing the kitchen, her coat still on, her bag still over her shoulder. If that clinic shuts down, 300 people lose the only health care they have. Mothers, children, people who work 2 jobs and still can't afford insurance. Her voice was sharp, furious, magnificent. Victor doesn't care. He has never once set foot in that building. He doesn't know a single patient's name. He used that place like a cash register, and when it's gone, he'll find another one, and the people I've been taking care of for 6 years will have nothing. Dominic watched her from the kitchen island, and something recalibrated in the way he saw her. She was not a civilian he was protecting. She was a partner. She saw angles he didn't. She understood the human cost of decisions that, in his world, were made on spreadsheets and settled in back rooms. She understood what landed on the ground floor. Dominic's response to Victor was cold and methodical. No violence. Not yet. He activated the records Sera had given him. Forensic accountants, shell company traces, tax irregularities fed through channels that would trigger audits on every Valenti-connected business in the city. He began dismantling Victor's financial infrastructure the way you dismantle a building. Not with a wrecking ball, but by pulling out the supports, one by one, until the weight does the work for you. Late that night, Sera came to his room. Not for romance, for strategy. She sat on the edge of his bed with a laptop balanced on her knees and turned the screen toward him. On it was something that made Dominic go very still. A complete map of Victor's laundering network. Every node, every connection, every shell company linked to every account, linked to every transaction that had ever passed through the clinic, and 4 other businesses she had identified on her own. 6 years of data, organized with the meticulous precision of a woman who had watched numbers that didn't add up and had refused to stop paying attention. It was better than anything Lorenzo's team had produced. It was better than anything Dominic had ever seen outside of a federal prosecution file. He looked at the screen, then at her. "You've been building this the whole time?" Sera met his eyes. "I told you I kept records. I didn't say I stopped." He stared at her. The woman her brother had called quiet. The woman the world had been told was nothing. "You're terrifying," he said. She almost smiled. "Good." Dominic launched the offensive on a Monday morning, and by Friday, the Valenti family was bleeding from every direction. It was a 2-front war, financial and territorial, simultaneous, surgical, the kind of coordinated dismantling that only a man who thinks 4 moves ahead can execute. On the financial side, Sera's records were fed through carefully insulated channels to the right federal contacts. Not directly, never directly, but through intermediaries and attorneys, and the particular gray architecture that exists between organized crime and the agencies that pretend to fight it. Audits triggered, subpoenas issued, bank accounts flagged for review. On the territorial side, Dominic's organization applied pressure to every Valenti business interest in the city. Suppliers stopped returning calls. Partners suddenly found other arrangements. Construction contracts that had been reliable for 15 years were quietly awarded to different firms. The ecosystem that had sustained the Valenti empire for a generation began pulling away the way a shoreline pulls away from a sinking ship. Slowly at first, then all at once. In 3 weeks, Victor Valenti went from a major power in Boston to a liability no one wanted to stand next to. Contracts evaporated. Associates flipped. 2 of his captains turned informant in exchange for immunity deals they would never have been offered if the federal case hadn't been built on the foundation of 6 years of meticulous records kept by a night shift nurse in Dorchester. The woman Victor threw away had built the weapon that destroyed him, and she hadn't even been trying. She had just been paying attention. Victor demanded a meeting. The same restaurant in the North End where the marriage had been proposed. The same private dining room. The same white tablecloths. But Victor was not the same man. He was sweating, aggressive. His collar was loose. His hands moved too much. Nothing like the polished operator who had sat across from Dominic 3 months ago, offering his sister like surplus inventory. "Call it off," Victor said. "Whatever you're doing, call it off." Dominic said nothing. He waited, the way he always waited, because silence from Dominic Sabello was never empty. It was loaded. Victor leaned forward. "She's still my blood, Dominic. I can still reach her." The temperature in the room changed. Dominic set down his glass. He leaned across the table, close enough that only Victor could hear. And he said something brief and specific and quiet. Something the walls would not remember, but Victor would never forget. Something that made it very clear that Victor Valenti's continued safety was now permanently conditional on Sera's well-being. Not negotiable, not temporary, permanent. Victor's face went white, then red, then something worse. The color of a man reaching for the last card in his hand and knowing it's the only one he has left. "You want to know why her mother really left?" Victor said. His voice was shaking. "She wasn't just some mistress. She was FBI, a federal informant. placed inside my father's operation to gather intelligence. She got pregnant. Things got complicated, and the Bureau pulled her out before her cover broke. He paused. Let it land. Your wife is the daughter of a federal informant, Dominic. In our world, that's a death sentence. And if this gets out, and I promise you it will, every family in Boston will look at you and see a man who's been compromised, married to a Fed's daughter, sleeping with the enemy's bloodline. Victor smiled. The desperate, ugly smile of a man who has lost everything and is trying to take someone down with him. How long do you think your empire survives that? Dominic did not move. He did not blink. He sat there with the stillness of a man absorbing a bullet and deciding whether it was fatal. Victor stood. He buttoned his coat with trembling hands. He left. Dominic sat in the restaurant for a long time. Lorenzo was across from him, waiting. The string of patience that connected the two men stretched taut in the silence. If this gets out, Lorenzo began. I know, Dominic said. He stood. He put on his coat. He walked to the car. He drove home through streets that looked the same as they had that morning, but were not the same. Nothing was the same. The manila folder sat on the passenger seat. Victor's proof, documents, a name, a bureau file number. Everything needed to confirm that the woman waiting for him at home, the woman who left soup on the stove and stitched his wounds and built a 6-year evidence map on her laptop, was the daughter of the one thing his world could never forgive. And now the cold open had context. The penthouse, the rain, the shattered phone, the blood on his knuckles, the folder pressed against her chest, and her voice cutting through the dark. How long have you known what I am? The penthouse, the rain, the shattered phone on the hardwood floor. We are back where we started. Dominic had come home with the folder. He had sat in his study and read it twice. Every page, every document, every line of a bureau file that confirmed the woman sleeping down the hall was the daughter of a federal informant who had been embedded inside the Valenti family 33 years ago. And then he had put his fist through the wall, not because of what Sera was, because of what had been done to her, because every cruel word, every bruise, every year of being treated like contamination, it all had an origin now. The Valentis hadn't hated her because she was illegitimate. They had hated her because she was evidence, and they had punished a child for the sins of a mother she never knew. He didn't hear Sera come into the study. He didn't know she had found the folder on his desk until he walked into the bedroom and saw her standing against the wall, the pages pressed against her chest, her face wet but hardening, the tears drying in real time, the armor coming back on. How long have you known? She asked. Since tonight. How long have you known what I am? Dominic looked at her. The folder, the question, the out she was building for him before he even asked for one. The same thing she had done since the day they met, releasing him, giving him permission to leave, because she had never believed she was worth the staying. You can annul this, she said. Her voice was steady, practiced, the voice of a woman who had been rehearsing her own abandonment since childhood. Walk away. No one would blame you. In your world, I'm poison. Dominic did not move. He did not look away. I've known what you are, he said, since the day you stitched a cut on my face without asking how I got it. She blinked. You're the woman who left soup on the stove for a man she didn't trust yet. You're the woman who built a 6-year evidence file because she knew something was wrong and refused to look away. You're the woman who chose to heal strangers for a living, while her own family wouldn't stop hurting her. He paused. The rain filled the silence. That's what you are, Sera. The rest is paperwork. She broke. Not the controlled, managed composure she had worn like a second skin since the day he met her. Something deeper. Something that had been sealed behind years of silence and survival, and the absolute refusal to let anyone see her need. It cracked open, all of it, at once, and what came out was the sound of a woman hearing, for the first time in 33 years, that someone saw everything, every scar, every secret, every piece of her that the world had called worthless, and was choosing to stay. Dominic crossed the room. He pulled her into him. His arms went around her, and he held her the way he had held nothing before her. Completely, without strategy, without calculation, with the full and terrifying weight of a man who had decided that this woman mattered more than the empire he had built, more than the name, more than the throne, more than every alliance and every deal and every carefully constructed structure that had made him untouchable. She was worth all of it, and he was done pretending she wasn't. In the days that followed, Dominic did not hide Sera's history. He controlled the narrative. He let it be known through the right channels, in the right rooms, to the right people, that Sera Sabello's past was not a vulnerability. It was a boundary, and anyone who had a problem with his wife had a problem with him. In a world where Dominic Sabello's displeasure was the most expensive thing a person could earn, the problem dissolved, quietly, completely. The way problems do when the man asking the question already knows the answer. Weeks later, a morning in January. The penthouse was quiet. Sera sat at the kitchen island with a medical journal and a coffee, her reading glasses sliding down her nose. Dominic sat across from her, reading the paper. The succulent she had brought from her old apartment sat on the windowsill between them, small and green and stubbornly alive. Neither of them was speaking. Neither of them needed to. The silence was warm, textured. The silence of two people who had found each other inside an arrangement designed to use them both, and who had chosen, freely and fiercely, to stay. They told her she was nothing. They told him she was a pawn, but a woman who heals and a man who protects. When those two forces find each other, they don't just survive. They become the most dangerous thing in any room, unbreakable.